You might remember this. This slide I've put in to remind me that, if you like, what we were getting clear was about the success criteria, yeah, and in doing so, the benefits. What they found was, actually, once they were much clearer about what they were actually wanted to improve, they actually said, well, actually, when we review the answer, because we haven't asked the right questions in our request for proposals, we're not actually sure if the contractor can actually deliver it. Yeah. So they actually not stopped, but they actually sort of took a time out and said, actually, we need to actually go in and look at what the contractors do on other mines and see if they have that capability. And they said, the great thing about New Zealand is it's legislation light. So in terms of their procurement processes under government, you just have to be fair, okay, and treat each party who's still in the contest in the same manner. Yeah. So you can knock someone out and say you're out. We're going to look at these two people now and just treat them fairly, okay, which is nice. So they actually spent 2-3 weeks actually going out and looking at the capabilities. Because again, the capability, it might have been they went to those mines in Australia, and actually all the mine was uniform. The coal was completely uniform. They didn't need to plan it. They could just extract it. So what they were actually going to them for, they didn't actually have. And potentially that was a deal breaker. The deal doesn't go ahead, but it was also could potentially affect the shares and the incentives. Because if they were only bringing 50% of what Solid Energy wanted to the party, then they weren't going to get the full 100%, if you like, which Solid Energy wanted to in terms of reward. Now that's a luxury they had because of New Zealand law, if you like. I think if there's a lesson to be learned from your perspective, it's not have it rigidly defined, but be clear about what you want and what the capabilities you are looking for when you go to the market, so you can ask the right questions and check them out, because you might not have that leeway to go back and change the procurement process. Okay, and that very much perhaps relates to what Mark was saying this morning about the pre-competition stages and so on. So that's just a gratuitous picture of the mining landscape. Incentive arrangements. Initial thoughts. We thought, followed by consultation, so they actually had a guy from a mining contractor as a consultant, about how the mining contractors would evaluate their profitability. And the conclusion of that was that while a large part was based on return on investment, i.e., they buy the mine, they buy the area, they buy the kit to mine it, it was also based on, well, what's the return based on our management team that we put in there? And if we were going to get the A team for this, then we actually needed to reward them in a way of similar magnitude, shall we say, yeah? So that they gave Stockton the A team rather than the C team. Yeah. On the other hand, we said potentially if there's no downside, then it's a risk-free opportunity, so that we don't need to give them it all. So that was the principle. Right. First thoughts on the arrangements. Well, originally we thought we'll have a 5-year contract. On those Likert scales of 0 to 5, they'd start at 3, say, and every time they reached a level up and that was embedded, they get a large incentive payment. Yeah? Okay. However, it was thought to be too rigid, as Solid Energy's commercial situation and priorities for the mine might well change, so they knew the recession was coming along at that time. Yeah? Okay. Circumstances within the mine might change. They were going into new areas. They had, at the time of initiating it, had studies which confirmed as much as they could the quality of the coal, that it was viable, but when they got there it might not be. Equally, it might be better than they thought. Yeah. The focus of where the contract, and as a result of that, the focus of where they wanted the contractor to put the effort in improving things, they needed to be able to change rather than and sort of guide them. And they also had in their mind was, well, actually, if we enter a 5-year contract and we don't get the incentive mechanism right, we're stuck with it. So even if nothing changed, we might be stuck with the wrong incentive mechanism, and the contractor might completely ignore one and go off on another tangent. Yeah. So the final version was an overarching framework agreement with an annual consultancy contract with incentives on top. Contractor paid for staff at cost, plus some profit. The most the contractor could lose was their profit. So small beer for someone who was used to running a mine. The target was set and agreed on an annual basis. So targets, they were jointly agreed or developed by the Alliance management team, the people who worked on a day-to-day basis with equal representation from the contractor and Solid Energy, and approved by the Alliance leadership team, using the liquor and the weighting. So the amount of incentive they got paid depended on the importance. Yeah. Annual incentives agreed and paid partly against direct performance against non-value targets. So in terms of those 7 non-financial areas, 6 or 7, it was, the non-value, the financial, it was, well, how well have you done that year? It was partly direct savings against the agreed annual operational cost and value added that year, and a combination of where share of savings paid according to performance. Now, that's sort of high level. I'll have a diagram which looks, when you build it up, very complex, but let's break it down. So over here, we had those, excluding value, those 6 or 7, is it? 6 areas. I realise I've left out operational. But essentially they said the width of them is related to the weighting, the importance put on them. Yep. So the more important ones are wider. Yep. And that's the total incentive pot. Yep. And depending upon the performance that year, they get paid that much. Yep. In terms of area. People still with me? Can I just check? Yep. Okay. Yeah. You also had an incentive mechanism. So each year they would set a budget for the mine. That budget was based on what are the costs of running the mine if we produce no coal, yeah? Plus, what in terms of the development do we need to do to the mine, in terms of the civil engineering infrastructure, to open up an area to get the drainage in, etc. And also on an expected output of coal. But it was also modified during the year depending upon what was the value they actually delivered. So if they didn't deliver the infrastructure, they weren't going to get paid for the savings they made through not delivering it. Yeah? Make sense? Still, yeah? So value delivered against the planned CapEx. And also the amount of coal actually extracted. So if recession comes along, they don't have to extract as much coal. They don't get paid as much because they haven't got as much costs related to it. So I think I've put that arrow there, but really it should be on that line, which might go up or down. Yeah. If they made a loss against that target, so they overrun, then the contract maximum payment was limited to this, yeah, to the contractor's profit, if you like, on his staff. There was also, though, a guaranteed profit on the cost overrun, so they got a proportion of that cost underrun, yeah. Okay, regardless of their performance against those ones up there. If they came in under cost, they got some of the share of the savings. But there was also an additional profit available. So in terms of an additional share was made available, providing they made savings and a performance against value objectives. And that was put into a pot up here, yep. And in the early stages of the alliance, that would be potentially relatively smaller, but towards the end it'd be relatively larger in order to really try and drive the improvements towards the top end, the game-breaking performance. And then what would they get paid? Well, they get paid in the same proportions as below. Yeah. So people clear? Yeah. I'm seeing nods. I'm not seeing anybody going, "What the hell are you talking about?" Right. Okay. Now that okay, it is quite. It's not a simple formula, but it's relatively simple given the complexities. However, it took a lot of thinking to get around it. I have to say that this is where what I didn't say was I went over in for a week in November, and why I was brought in was because being a poor independent consultant, I have to have 3 months off every couple of years in New Zealand, where the cost of living is a lot less, okay, in their summer and our winter. So as a poor struggling independent consultant, basically this is what we developed over the 3 months that I was there. Now, so I went home essentially, and they had selected their contractor. Having this in their mind actually meant that having selected the contractor, they got to contract within a month. Yeah. Which, considering if they hadn't had this in their mind, and it had started from negotiation with something not in their mind and what's important to us and what are the KPIs, etc., I guess it would have taken a hell of a lot longer. Okay, now so obviously signed it. So in terms of just finishing off that, in terms of signing the contract, these were the key challenges which we identified earlier. So identifying, defining and managing social and other soft benefits. So we talked about people, but there was also things like public relations and perception in there. There were environmental performance, etc. Well, you can go a long way to defining them in terms of written statements and on a scale against which they're paid. So we define them. Aligning the expected benefits to a constantly changing business framework. Well, we built in flexibility by a use of a framework arrangement. Yeah. So if things changed, well, it was on an annual contract basis. We built that in. Yeah. Designing profiles which match the client's emphasis on different benefits to the cost drivers of the supplier. Well, we weighted them as a client, and we built in flexibility via the framework agreement. So if they found that something wasn't working, it was costing too much, and bear in mind most of the cost actually fell on the client, the employer, well, we could modify it next year. Yeah? And in that discussion. Reflect the degree of influence the different parties have in managing risk and uncertainty. They took out, because they got clear about their capabilities and what they wanted to achieve, they evaluated their ability to influence and therefore shared the reward. And sorry about finishing on a damp squid here, but the last one, there were only two parties involved, so I don't think it's applicable. But anyway, so I don't think I've quite covered that one. So what happened next? Well, they all lived happily ever after, obviously. And there we've got the sunset picture. I was out there in late September, early October again for another week, Joy. They were very, I think, in terms of the getting the quality out on time every time, but using the worst possible quality coal, they were very pleased. They were put in the resource and the planning was in place. The mine was working a lot more efficient. In terms of are they going to get the long-term benefits of it embedding into the team? It's too early to say. What I would say, and I meant to say earlier, was in the initial stages, the contractors management team was, shall we say, going to take the lead. Yeah. The plan was over the so there would almost be, not, when I say man-to-man marking is the wrong word, but an equivalent. So whereas before the mine manager was a solid energy person, initially that was going to be a contractor's person, but the deputy would be the solid energy person. Over the course of the framework, that would shift, yeah, and phase out. So one of the things we were looking for at the selection bit was how are you going to coach and bring on the people? Yeah, because that was the biggest weighted non-value add objective. So with that, I think I'll leave you there. I don't think I've got time for questions, and I'll leave it there. All right. So